TNA has had so many great world champions, from Bobby Roode to Sting, but not every reign can be a home run. Today we're going to look at the TNA world champions that didn't quite live up to the goal. Whether it was bad timing, bad booking, or bad behavior, these reigns were the absolute worst TNA world champions of all time. At number 5, unfortunately, we have to put Chris Sabin on the list. Sabin's journey to the TNA World title started with his return from a devastating ACL tear. And after months of recovery, he fought his way back into contention with the X Division Championship twice in 2013. He would end up trading in the X Division title for a world title shot, using the Option C stipulation. If you know me, you know I don't love Option C, but this at least provided a gateway to Chris Sabin to the main event. Something that was long awaited. And Sabin would win at Destination X against Bully Ray for a nice feel-good moment for the fans. He overcame the odds against the Aces and Eights and became a Triple Crown champion in TNA. But Sabin's reign only lasted a month. And on August 15th at Hardcore Justice, Sabin would drop the belt right back to Bully Ray. This time in a cage match with interference from Tito Ortiz. Tito, why can't I avoid you? Sabin's underdog story was a really good start, but TNA just completely skipped over the build to this transition, and he didn't even have enough time to establish himself as a credible champion. Bully Ray revealed that this was not the original plan at all, and tried to talk Eric Bischoff out of it. Eazy-E said that was above his pay grade. But Bully Ray knew how bad this would be for Chris Sabin. It put him in a terrible spot. And Bully claims that TNA just didn't want to pay his medical bills, so they gave him a month-long title reign as a "we owe you one." It was all rushed for a feel-good moment without actually thinking about the future of Chris Sabin. Next up at number 4, we have Eli Drake, who would win a 20-man gauntlet match from the second entrant position to capture the vacant Global Force Wrestling Global Championship. That's a little redundant. It was later renamed the Impact Global Championship as Global Force Wrestling and Impact Wrestling had merged, or whatever. Company turmoil aside, this had marked Eli Drake, or LA Knight's, first world title. His reign would see defenses against Matt Sydal, Petey Williams, and Scott Hall's son in Japan. Alright. At Bound for Glory 2017, Eli Drake would defend his title against Johnny Impact, and he would retain thanks to Alberto el Patron nailing Impact with a steel chair for some reason. This continued Drake and Johnny's feud, inserting Alberto as a third party, which nobody cared about. This feud would last until February 1st to be exact, because Austin Aries was now back. And on his first night, he would challenge Eli Drake in a title match, ending his 146-day reign in seconds. Drake did not have the strongest title defenses, and the second he faced a guy that had some credibility, he lost. It felt like his title reign was long overdue, but once he actually got it, they made him feel like a placeholder. He held it for a while, but wow, was it not memorable. And it's a shame, this seemed like the run that would really define him or elevate him as a true main eventer. It was clear that he was talented, but the turbulent period for TNA detracted from his reign. His natural charisma was undeniable, but TNA's creative direction was a mess, and it definitely prevented him from being the champion that he could have been. Eli Drake's title reign is frustrating. It's more of a missed opportunity than just awful. I feel like he had the charisma to carry the company, but just wasn't given the story to work with, which is similar to our number 3 entrant, Magnus. On November 21st, 2013, Magnus entered a tournament to crown a new TNA World Heavyweight Champion. He would defeat names like Samoa Joe, Kurt Angle, and Jeff Hardy. In fact, that Jeff Hardy match was a Dixieland match. Yes, a weird hybrid of a steel cage and a ladder match. But in the process, Magnus would turn heel by aligning with the namesake Dixie Carter, becoming a corporate champion. And the entire reign that followed was marked by constant interference and heavy-handed booking that portrayed him as Dixie Carter's chosen one. with him often being referred to as a paper champion. On January 2nd, 2014, Magnus defeated AJ Styles with some of the most interference I have ever seen in a pro wrestling match. This reeks of Vince Russo. And it does indeed make Magnus look like a paper champion. But why are you making your world champion look terrible? They had a chance to redeem themselves with Sting's farewell now. Magnus had already kicked out AJ Styles, but Sting was putting his career on the line in a no DQ match against Magnus for the belt. This went almost exactly the same. It was Sting, a legend, and this was how he was going out? Magnus retained with outside interference, and it was just totally flat. This is seriously the least credible world champion I have ever seen. Samoa Joe would call him out on this and challenge him for the title at Lockdown. Was this the time for Magnus to finally prove himself against a worthy competitor? No, because that's Abyss's hand shooting out of the ring, and he dragged Samoa Joe to hell. This allowed Magnus to retain his championship in the most uninteresting way possible. It wouldn't be until April 10th, 2014 when Eric Young would win a gauntlet match to earn a title shot that same night. Young would defeat Magnus cleanly and ended his reign at 128 days. Magnus got his rematch at Sacrifice, but was unsuccessful, and that solidified his reign as a short-lived chapter in TNA history, because Magnus went straight back to the mid-card right after this. And I hope Magnus wasn't blamed for any of this, because the idea was dead on arrival. Magnus aligned with Dixie Carter was just similar to the same exact thing WWE was doing with their Authority storyline. It lacked originality, and the execution was arguably even worse. Fans weren't buying Magnus as a credible champion because TNA didn't want you to. They wanted you to see Dixie Carter. And by they, I mean Dixie Carter. Magnus's title reign is Dixie Carter's title reign by proxy. Almost every major title defense he had saw some of the most interference you could ever see. And this was missed potential. Magnus was building some momentum as an upper card babyface before this. This heel transition into Randy Orton light was just so forced, and the booking never allowed him to have any chance at becoming a star. It was just a hollow, uninspired run as a corporate champion, and it should have been a significant milestone for TNA's first British world champion. Nick Aldis would go to the NWA and really shine there, and now you can see him on SmackDown as a general manager. Can't say I expected that one when I was watching this world title reign as a kid. But hey, he was always talented, and I'm glad he's getting a fair shake now. Number 2 on this list is a case of bad booking, bad timing, and bad behavior. Alberto El Patron, who made his TNA debut on March 2nd, 2017, was immediately thrusted into the world title picture. He confronted Bobby Lashley and was granted a world title match that night. Alberto would defeat Lashley in a controversial way, which prompted him to relinquish the title that night, and it was not a recognized title victory. Okay, so we're already planting the seed for Alberto Del Rio to become the new face of TNA. That's questionable enough, but let's move on. He would defeat EC3 as well as Magnus, and that one was to win the Global Force World Championship for whatever that's worth. And then on July 2nd at Slammiversary, he would unify this with the TNA World title, which was held by Lashley. El Patron became the unified Global Force Wrestling World Heavyweight Champion. And his reign lasted from Slammiversary in early July until August 14th. During this time, he was involved in just a terrible storyline with LAX. LAX was like trying to recruit Alberto El Patron to join the faction. He was refusing, so they abducted his family, and then Alberto said he was gonna join them, and then he didn't. Then they had 6-man tag matches with his dad and his Nepo brother. I mean, this was seriously terrible. The only way it could get worse was if Alberto's family swerved on him, and that may have been the plan. But things were cut short on July 12th when Alberto was suspended due to a domestic violence incident involving his real-life girlfriend, Paige. On August 14th, TNA stripped Alberto El Patron of the championship. So they had rushed him in there as their big shiny new toy. He wasn't exactly over, They gave him the belt, he had this terrible feud with LAX, with a bunch of family drama that nobody cared about. And then he's getting into off-screen scandals involving domestic violence allegations. So yes, this reign was incomplete. I don't like where it was headed anyway. The walking PR nightmare known as Alberto el Patron is much more remembered for the off-screen drama than any of his world title moments. This was TNA just going for the short-term buzz, and I don't think it paid off. And speaking of thinking of the future, we have the #1 worst TNA World Champion of all time. Hands down, it is Tessa Blanchard, the only female TNA World Heavyweight Champion. And that started with her intergender feud with Sami Callihan, culminating in the first ever intergender main event on a major pay-per-view. And while she lost to Callihan, this felt like a test, and she passed. It got a lot of attention and praise and built her as a credible competitor even against men. On November 19th, she became the #1 contender in a gauntlet match, defeating Moose, Rich Swann, Daga, Michael Elgin, and Brian Cage. She pinned Brian Cage. This earned her a #1 contender shot against Sami Callihan once more. On January 12th, 2020, Blanchard would make history by defeating Callihan to become the first woman to win the TNA World Championship. It was a groundbreaking moment. She's a trailblazer. She was a symbol of women's empowerment. Well, that's not the full story. The day before the event, Blanchard was embroiled in allegations of racism and bullying. Accusations included spitting on a black wrestler and using racial slurs. While Blanchard denied these claims, a lot of people came forward to support these allegations. As you can imagine, this drew some backlash from fans and wrestlers, and it casted a shadow over her title reign from the start. It was pretty polarizing. TNA had just doubled down on Tessa Blanchard right after all of this went down. So Tessa would begin her reign, and the momentum was already gone. She made one successful title defense against Taya Valkyrie in a match that marked the first time two women competed for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. And then the COVID-19 pandemic took hold. Tessa opted to stay in Mexico with her fiance at the time, Daga, and became distant with TNA. Her absence in this time wasn't ideal, and maybe there was some tension there, but I'm sure they can get her back on board. Well, they didn't. Things boiled over when Tessa failed to submit promos for a pre-tape segment. On June 25th, 2020, her contract was terminated, and she was stripped of the TNA World title, thus ending a very controversial world title run. You had allegations of racism and bullying that completely overshadowed what should have been a historic title win, and it just became a PR nightmare. Okay, let's say all of these credible sources are lying about this situation. Well, Tessa still only defended the belt once against Taya Valkyrie. I thought the whole point of this Tessa Blanchard run was that she was an intergender world champion. And then COVID hits and she can't even do a pre-tape? I mean, I know COVID was a weird time, but I can't say I expected Tessa Blanchard to hold the world title hostage in Mexico. It's almost like it was a bad idea to put your world title on this woman to begin with. Tessa Blanchard has been taking steps towards redeeming herself and doing a lot of interviews. She's opened up about her struggles with anxiety and depression after being blackballed in pro wrestling. Chelsea Green noted that she would not wish self-harm on anyone, but it is hard to consider forgiving Tessa Blanchard when all she's been seeking is an apology, and nobody has received one. TNA's commitment to trying to make this work ended up being historically bad, and the worst TNA World Champion of all time. Let us know who you think is the worst TNA World Champion ever. Make sure to leave it down in the comments below and subscribe for more content.